The third memoir. 1. One of Teikiki's predictions came true, while the other missed the mark. The one about being loved, which was an unflattering prediction, turned out to be accurate, but the blessed prediction that I would surely become a great painter was incorrect. I was only able to become a nameless, poorly skilled cartoonist in a shabby magazine. Because of the Kamakura incident, I was expelled from high school and started living in a small, 3-tatami mat room on the second floor of Hiram's house. It seemed that a very small amount of money was being sent from my hometown every month, but it wasn't sent directly to me, rather, it was sent secretly to Hiram, and it appeared to be in a form that my brothers were sending money to my father in secret. That was it, I was completely cut off from my hometown. Hiram was always in a bad mood, and even when I forced a smile, he would not return it. It was pathetic, almost comical, how easily a person could change, as if flipping their palm, and all he would say to me was, "You must not go out. In any case, please don't go out." It seemed that Hiram suspected I might commit suicide, specifically, that I might jump back into the sea after the woman. He strictly forbade me from going out. However, I couldn't drink alcohol or smoke, and I spent my days curled up in the 3-tatami mat kotatsu, reading old magazines, living like a fool, completely devoid of the will to commit suicide. Hiram's house was near the Okubo Medical School, with a sign that boasted Seiruen, a dealer of paintings and antiques, but the actual store was quite modest, with a narrow entrance and dusty interiors filled with a hodgepodge of junk. Hiram did not rely on the junk in the store for his business, rather, he seemed to profit by facilitating the transfer of ownership of his so-called clients' treasured items. He rarely sat in the store, usually rushing out in the morning with a serious expression, leaving only a boy of 17 or 18 behind to watch over me. This boy seemed to think of me, the second-floor tenant, as either a fool or a lunatic. When he wasn't busy, he would play catch outside with neighborhood kids, even lecturing me like an adult. Since I was the type of person who couldn't argue with others, I would listen to him with a tired yet somewhat impressed expression, complying with his words. This boy was Hiram's illegitimate son. Yet there were strange circumstances that meant Hiram didn't claim him as his son, and it seemed there was a reason for Hiram's lifelong single status as well. I vaguely remembered hearing rumors about this from my family, but I had never been particularly interested in the lives of others, so I didn't know any of the details. However, there was something about the boy's gaze that oddly reminded me of a fish, so perhaps he truly was Hiram's hidden child. But if that were the case, they were indeed a lonely pair. Late at night, they sometimes ordered soba without telling me and ate in silence. Hiram always made the boy prepare my meals. He would carry my meals on a separate tray upstairs 3 times a day, while he and the boy dined together in the damp 4.5-tatami room downstairs, making clattering sounds as they moved their dishes around in a hurried manner. One evening at the end of March, Hiram, perhaps having found an unexpected source of income or perhaps having some other scheme, it's likely that both assumptions were correct, along with several other subtle causes that I could never guess, invited me to the dining table downstairs, which was an unusual occasion, set with a bottle of sake and a plate of tuna sashimi. He expressed his admiration for the feast, praised the food, and even offered me a bit of sake while I sat there in a daze. "What are you planning to do from now on?" he asked. I didn't answer and instead picked up a tatami sardine from the plate, gazing into the fish's silver eyes. As the warmth of the sake began to take effect, I felt nostalgic for the carefree days when I used to play around, and even felt nostalgic for Hiraiki. I suddenly yearned for freedom, almost moved to tears. Since coming to this house, I had lost even the motivation to play the fool. I lay among Hiram's and the boy's disdain, and Hiram seemed to be avoiding long conversations with me. I had almost resigned myself to being a silly lodger. Prosecutorial discretion doesn't appear to result in any criminal record, Hiram said. So, your attitude can determine your rehabilitation. If you truly want to change your ways and come to me sincerely for advice, I'll consider it. Hiram's manner of speaking, like that of all people in the world, had this complicated, almost hazy quality that felt evasive, embodying a subtle complexity. I was always bewildered by his excessive caution and seemingly pointless negotiations. This often left me feeling indifferent, leading me to adopt a defeated attitude, joking around or simply nodding in silent compliance. I later realized that this time, Hiram could have simply made a straightforward report to me, which would have sufficed. His unnecessary caution, and indeed, the inexplicable pretensions of people in the world, left me feeling gloomy. At that moment, Hiram should have just said this: whether it's a public or private institution, just enroll in a school somewhere starting in April. Your living expenses will be adequately covered by the government once you're enrolled. Much later, I found out that was indeed the case. I would have followed that instruction without question. However, because of Hiram's overly cautious way of presenting things, it became unnecessarily complicated, and my path in life changed completely. If you have no intention of coming to me sincerely for advice, then there's nothing I can do. What kind of advice? I genuinely had no idea what he meant. That's something only you know in your heart. For example? For example, what do you intend to do from now on? Should I get a job? No, what do you feel? But even if I go to school? Yes, money is needed. But the issue isn't money, it's your feelings. Why didn't he just say that the money would come from the government? If he had said that one thing, it would have clarified my feelings. Instead, I was left completely in the dark. What do you think? Do you have any hopes for the future? I'm sorry. Well, that's certainly something to worry about. Since I've taken on your care, I don't want you to have half-hearted feelings about it. I want to see your commitment to seriously follow the path of rehabilitation. For example, if you came to me with a clear plan for your future, I would be willing to consider your consultation. After all, this is the assistance of a poor person like me, so if you expect the same luxury as before, you'll be disappointed. However, if your resolve is firm and you establish a clear direction for your future and consult me, I would even think of helping you, little by little, in your rehabilitation. Do you understand how I feel? What do you intend to do from here on out? If I can't stay here on the second floor, then I'll have to work. Are you seriously saying that? In today's world, even if you graduate from the Imperial University? No, I'm not going to be a salaryman. Then what? I want to be a painter. I said it boldly. Really? I can never forget the sly shadow on Hiram's face as he laughed and shrank his neck at that moment. It was a kind of contemptuous shadow, or perhaps not quite that. If the world were compared to the ocean, it was as if that strange shadow floated in the depths of the sea, revealing a glimpse of adult life beneath the surface. He told me that such things were pointless, that I didn't have my feelings sorted out at all, and that I should think seriously about it overnight. He chased me back up to the second floor, but even as I lay down, no thoughts came to mind. As dawn broke, I escaped from Hiram's house. I would definitely return in the evening. I was going to visit my friend mentioned below to discuss my future plans, so there was no need to worry. Really. I wrote this in large letters on a note, then secretly noted down the address and name of Masao Hiraiki from Asakusa, and slipped out of Hiram's house. It wasn't that I ran away out of frustration from Hiram's scolding. I was indeed, as Hiram said, a man whose feelings weren't solid, and I had no idea what my future plans were. Being a burden to Hiram was pitiful for him, and if, by any chance, I found the motivation to set my aspirations, the thought of relying on that poor Hiram for financial support was unbearably painful for me. However, I wasn't genuinely thinking of going to consult someone like Hiroki about my so-called future plans when I left Hiram's house. It was merely that I wanted to reassure Hiram, even just a little, and, while I may have harbored the detective novel-like strategy of wanting to escape as far as possible in the meantime, there was indeed a faint trace of that feeling. More than that, I was actually terrified of shocking Hiram all of a sudden and confusing him. It may be more accurate to say that I was afraid to say it outright because it would surely be discovered. My sad tendency to always embellish my words, even when I know it will be revealed, is one of my traits, similar to what society calls lying. However, I hardly ever embellished for my own benefit. Rather, the fear of a sudden change in atmosphere that felt suffocating, even knowing it would later be detrimental to me, often led me to add a bit of embellishment out of my spirit of desperate service, even if that service was twisted, weak, or foolish. It seems I had written down Hiroki's address and name on the edge of the note, floating up from the depths of my memory at that moment. I left Hiram's house, walked to Shinjuku, sold the book I had in my pocket, and once again found myself at a loss. I realized that while I was pleasant to everyone, I had never truly experienced what friendship is. Aside from a playmate like Hiroki, every interaction I had felt like nothing but a source of pain. In an effort to ease that pain, I desperately played the fool, which only left me exhausted. When I happened to see a face I barely knew or someone resembling it on the street, I was startled and overwhelmed by a repulsive shiver that nearly made me dizzy. Though I knew I was liked by others, it seemed I lacked the capacity to love anyone. Moreover, I often seriously question whether people in the world actually possess the ability to love, given that it was impossible for someone like me to have what is commonly referred to as a close friend, and I even lacked the ability for what is known as a visiting visit. The gates of others' homes appeared to me even more sinister than the gates of hell in the Divine Comedy, and I genuinely felt that beyond those gates, a dreadful, dragon-like, foul beast was lurking, without any exaggeration. I had no associations with anyone. I could not visit anywhere. Hiroki. That was precisely how the joke became a reality. As I had written in that note, I decided to visit Hiroki in Asakusa. Until now, I had never gone to Hiroki's house. I had always summoned him to my place with telegrams. But now, even the telegram fee felt burdensome, and out of bitterness from my fallen state, I thought that sending a telegram alone might not bring Hiroki to me. Thus, I resolved to face my greatest weakness, visiting inside as I boarded the streetcar, realizing that perhaps the only lifeline I had left in this world was Hiroki. This realization struck me with a spine-chilling sensation. Hiroki was at home. In a dirty alleyway, he lived on the second floor of a two-story house, using only a 6-tatami room on the second floor, while below him were his elderly parents and a young craftsman busily stitching and hammering together the straps of geta, wooden sandals. That day, Hiroki showed me a new side of himself as a city dweller. It was what is commonly referred to as shrewdness. His cold and cunning selfishness was shocking to a countryside bumpkin like me. He was not a man like myself, who flowed endlessly without direction. I'm truly amazed at you. Did your old man give you permission? Not yet? I couldn't say I had run away. So, as usual, I deceived him. Even though he would surely notice soon, I lied. That will work out somehow. Hey, this isn't a laughing matter. I'm warning you, don't play the fool too much. I have things to do today. I've been awfully busy lately. What kind of things? Hey, Don't cut the string of the zabuton, floor cushion. As I spoke, I unconsciously played with one of the strings of the zabuton I was sitting on, pulling it tight and fidgeting with it. It seemed that even a single string of goods from his home was precious to Hiraiki, who scolded me without a hint of shame, glaring at me with eyes like sharpened points. When I thought about it, Hiraiki had not lost anything in our association up until now. Hiraiki's elderly mother brought in 2 bowls of sweet red bean soup on a tray. "Ah, this is," Hiraiki said, bowing to his elderly mother like a dutiful son, speaking with an unnaturally polite tone. "I'm sorry, is this sweet red bean soup? How extravagant. You didn't have to go through this trouble. I have to go out soon for an errand." "No, but still, it would be a waste not to enjoy your pride and joy. I'll have some. Would you like some too? It's specially made by your mother. Ah, this is delicious. How extravagant." He seemed genuinely delighted, eating with great gusto. I also slurped some, but it smelled of hot water, and when I ate the mochi, it was something I couldn't understand. It wasn't mochi at all. I certainly did not look down on that poverty. At that time, I didn't think it was unappetizing, and I truly felt the old mother's heartfelt effort. I might have a fear of poverty, but I believed I didn't have a sense of contempt for it. With that sweet red bean soup, and seeing Hiraiki delight in it, I was shown the modest nature of urban dwellers and the reality of families in Tokyo, where the distinction between inside and outside was clear. I, on the other hand, was completely left behind, running away endlessly from human life without any distinction between inside and outside, and even felt as if Hiraiki had abandoned me. I want to note how I felt utterly desolate while handling the chipped lacquered chopsticks for the sweet red bean soup. "Sorry, but I have things to do today," Hiraiki said as he stood up and put on his jacket. "Excuse me for that." At that moment, a female visitor arrived for Hiraiki, and my situation took a sudden turn. Hiraiki perked up, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just about to come visit you, but this person showed up suddenly." "No, it's fine. Please, come in." He seemed quite flustered, snatching the zabuton I had turned over and offered, turning it back over again and offering it to the woman. There was only one guest zabuton in the room besides Hiraiki's. The woman was thin and had a prominent spine. She set the zabuton aside and sat in a corner near the entrance. I sat there absent-mindedly listening to their conversation. The woman seemed to be from a magazine company and appeared to have come to collect something, perhaps a cut or some favor from Hiraiki. "I'm in a hurry. It's ready. It's been ready for quite some time. Here you go." A telegram arrived. Hiraiki read it, and the cheerful look on his face quickly turned grim. "Damn. What's this?" It was a telegram from Hiram. "Anyway, come back right away. I'd like to send you off, but I don't have the time right now. Look at your carefree face while having run away. Which part of town are you from?" "Okubo." I answered without thinking. "Well, then, that's close to the company." The woman was 28 years old, originally from Koshu. She lived in an apartment in Koenji with her 5-year-old daughter. She mentioned that she had been widowed for 3 years. "You seem like someone who has gone through a lot of hardships. You're quite considerate." Poor thing. For the first time, I experienced a life akin to a man's mistress. After Shizuko, the name of that female reporter, started working at the magazine in Shinjuku, I and Shigeko, the 5-year-old daughter, were left at home quietly. Until then, it seemed that while their mother was away, Shigeko would play in the apartment manager's room, but with the appearance of a considerate uncle as a playmate, she seemed quite pleased. I remained there for about a week, absent-mindedly. A kite string was caught in the electrical wires right next to the apartment window, blowing in the spring dust wind, getting torn, yet stubbornly clinging to the wires, seeming to nod or something. Every time I saw it, I would bitterly smile, blush, and even dream of it, being tormented. I want money. How much? A lot. It's true that when the money runs out, so do the ties. How ridiculous. That's so old-fashioned. Oh. But you don't understand. If things stay like this, I might end up running away. Who's really poor? And who's going to run away? How strange. I want to earn my own money to buy alcohol, no, cigarettes. I think I'm much better at drawing than Hiraki. At such times, what naturally came to my mind were those self-portraits I drew during my middle school days, known as Ghosts by Taikiki. They were lost masterpieces. They had been lost during numerous moves, but I felt that those were certainly exceptional paintings. Even after trying to create various works, I could never come close to that treasured memory, and I was continually troubled by a weary sense of loss, as if my chest were empty. A glass of absinthe left untouched. I secretly described that feeling of loss, which seemed eternally irreparable, in that way. When the topic of painting came up, that glass of absinthe flickered before my eyes, and I felt an anxious yearning to show that painting to this person and to make them believe in my artistic talent. Well, I don't know about that. You make jokes with such a serious face, it's quite endearing, she said. It's not a joke, it's true. Oh, I want to show that painting, I thought in a frenzy, then suddenly changed my mind and gave up. It's a comic. At least, I believe I'm better at drawing comics than Hiraki is. Those words of a clownish excuse seemed to be taken more seriously. That's true. I was actually impressed. The comics you always draw for Shige-chan make me burst out laughing. Why don't you give it a try? I could ask the editor-in-chief at my company to look at it. That company published a little-known monthly magazine aimed at children. When I see you, most women can't help but want to do something for you. You're always so timid, yet you're a funny guy. Occasionally, you seem to be really down by yourself, but that only makes women more intrigued. Even when Shizuko said various things to me and flattered me, if I thought that this was precisely the disgraceful nature of a man's mistress, I would only sink further into despair and couldn't feel any better. I secretly wished for money rather than women, wanting to escape from Shizuko and to be independent, but the more I tried, the more I found myself having to rely on her. After running away from home, I received almost all the care from this manly woman from Koshu, and as a result, I had to be even more timid in front of Shizuko. Through Shizuko's arrangements, a meeting was set up with Hiram, Hiraki, and Shizuko, and I completely severed ties with my hometown. Thus, it was decided that I would cohabit with Shizuko with the world in clear view. Thanks to Shizuko's efforts, my comics surprisingly became a source of income, which allowed me to buy alcohol and cigarettes. However, my sense of insecurity and gloom only continued to grow. As I sank deeper into despair, drawing Shizuko's magazine's monthly comic series The Adventures of Kinta and Oda, I suddenly remembered my hometown, and overwhelmed by loneliness, I found my pen refusing to move, and I even shed tears with my head down. In such moments, the faint consolation was Shige-chan. At that time, she would call me Daddy without any hesitation. Daddy, is it true that if you pray, God will give you anything? I wished to make that prayer myself. Oh, grant me a cold will. Show me the essence of being human. If a person pushes another aside, is that not a sin? Give me a mask of anger. Yeah, that's right. God would probably give Shige-chan anything, but maybe not me. I was afraid of even God. I could not believe in God's love, only believing in His punishment. Faith seemed to me merely bowing my head in submission to receive God's whip at the judgment seat. I could believe in hell, but I simply could not believe in the existence of heaven. Why can't you? Because I disobeyed my parents. Really? Everyone says Daddy is a really good person. That's because they're deceiving themselves. I know that everyone here in this apartment shows me goodwill, but I can't explain to Shige-chan how terrified I am of everyone. The more I fear them, the more they like me, and the more I am liked, the more I fear, and I must distance myself from everyone. It was an unfortunate malady that was nearly impossible to explain to Shige-chan. What do you want to ask God for, Shige-chan? I casually shifted the conversation. Shige-chan wants her real daddy. I was startled and felt dizzy. An enemy. Was I Shige-chan's enemy, or was she mine? In any case, here was another terrifying adult threatening me, a stranger, an incomprehensible stranger, a stranger full of secrets. Suddenly, Shige-chan's face looked like that. I thought she was the only one, but it turned out that she too had the tail of a cow that suddenly swats a fly. From then on, I found myself having to be timid even around Shige-chan. Are you still a ledger? Are you there? Hiraiki had started to visit me again. He was the man who had made me feel so lonely on the day I ran away from home, yet I could not refuse him and welcomed him with a faint smile. Your comics seem to be quite popular. Perhaps it's because amateurs have a boldness that knows no fear, so we can't compare. But don't let your guard down. Your sketches are still lacking. He even took on an attitude like that of a mentor. I wondered what kind of expression he would have if I showed him my painting of that ghost, and while I writhed in agony. Don't say that. It would make me scream. Hiraiki seemed even more pleased. Just relying on your talent for navigating the world won't last long. The talent for navigating society. All I could do was smile wryly. Me, with a talent for navigating society. However, to fear, avoid, and deceive others like I do is the same as adhering to that cunning survival lesson of the old saying, a God that is not touched does not cause harm. Ah, humans don't understand each other at all. They think they are the best of friends while completely misjudging one another, going through life unaware of this fact, only to cry and read eulogies when the other dies. Horiguchi, after all, was the one who had reluctantly agreed to take care of my affairs after I ran away. This must have been pushed on him by Shizuko, acting as if he were my great benefactor for reform or a kind of moonlight guardian. He would give me lectures with a serious face, and sometimes he would drunkenly visit and stay the night, or borrow 5 yen, always 5 yen, from me. But you should stop with the womanizing, society won't allow it any longer. What does he mean by society? Is it referring to multiple humans? Where exactly is the essence of this so-called society? Nevertheless, I had lived until now thinking of it as something strong, harsh, and frightening. However, when Horiguchi said that, I suddenly thought, isn't society just you? That thought almost slipped out, but I held it back, not wanting to provoke Horiguchi. Society won't allow it. It's not society, it's you who won't allow it, right? If you do that, you'll face terrible consequences from society. It's not society, it's you, isn't it? Soon you'll be buried by society. It's not society, you'll be the one burying me, right? Know your own personal horror, your strangeness, your wickedness, your ancient raccoon-like traits, and your witch-like nature. Various words crossed my mind, but all I did was wipe the sweat from my face and laugh, saying, "Cold sweat, cold sweat." However, since that moment, I began to hold a thought that society is just individuals. And after starting to think that society might be composed of individuals, I became able to move a little more on my own will than before. Borrowing Shizuko's words, I became a bit more selfish and stopped being so timid. Again, borrowing Horiguchi's words, I became strangely stingy. And borrowing Shige's words, I became less affectionate toward her. Quietly, without laughing, I took care of Shige every day while working on the adventures of Kenta and Oda and the nonchalant Nanki Manjo, as well as my own nonsensical series titled Tsikachi Pinchan, which I myself could not comprehend. I responded to the various orders. Here and there, orders from other than Shizuko's company started to come in, but they were all from what could be called third-rate publishers, even more vulgar than Shizuko's company. With a truly gloomy feeling, slowly and reluctantly, my drawing speed was quite slow, only painting because I wanted money for alcohol. Then, when Shizuko returned from the company, I would head out, exchanging places with her, to drink cheap, strong alcohol at stalls or stands near Koenji Station, becoming a bit merry and returning to the apartment. "The more I see you, the stranger your face looks," I would say. "The face of Nanki Manjo is actually inspired by your sleeping face. Your sleeping face has aged quite a bit too. You look like a 40-year-old man. It's your fault. I've been drained. Just like the flow of water in the human body, isn't it? Why do you fret over this? Don't make a fuss, go to sleep quickly. Or do you want dinner?" She remained calm and barely acknowledged me. "I'll drink, though. Just like the flow of water in the human body. The flow of people and, no, the flow of water. And the body of water." Singing, I would have her undress and press my forehead against her chest, falling asleep like that. That was my daily life. And the next day, I repeated the same thing. I should follow the custom as yesterday. That is, as long as I avoid rough and boisterous pleasures. Naturally, great sorrow will not come either. The toad will go around the obstructing stones in its path. When I found these lines from a poem by Guy Charles Cross, translated by Ueda Bin, I turned red with embarrassment. Toad. That's me. Whether society forgives or not, whether I am buried or not, it doesn't matter. I am inferior to dogs and cats. A toad. I just crawl along. My drinking gradually increased. Not just in the area around Koenji Station, but I also ventured to Shinjuku and Ginza, sometimes even spending the night outside, behaving like a rogue at bars to avoid customs, kissing indiscriminately, essentially becoming even more wild and coarse than I was before that tragic love, and I became so financially strained that I started taking out Shizu's clothes. More than a year had passed since I had laughed wryly at that tattered kite, and during the cherry blossom season, I secretly took Shizu's obi and juban to a pawn shop to get money, drank in Ginza, and spent 2 nights outside. On the 3rd night, feeling rather unwell, I unconsciously tiptoed to Shizu's room in the apartment, and I could hear Shizu and Shige's conversation from inside. "Why do you drink alcohol? Dad doesn't drink because he likes it, you know. He's too good a person, that's why." "Good people drink alcohol?" "Not necessarily, but Dad will surely be surprised. He might not like it. Look, look, it jumped out of the box. Like Sekachipinkan." "That's right." I heard Shizu's genuinely happy, soft laughter. When I peered through the narrow opening of the door, I saw a little white rabbit bouncing around the room, while the mother and child chased it. They are happy. This foolish person, me, will come between the two and ruin them. Modest happiness. Good parents. Oh, if God would listen to a prayer from someone like me, just once in my lifetime, I would pray. I felt like I wanted to huddle there and pray. I quietly closed the door and went back to Ginza, never to return to that apartment. And then, near Kyobashi, I ended up lying down again in a bar, still in the guise of a male companion. Society. I had a vague sense that I was beginning to understand it. In the conflicts between individuals, especially in the immediate struggles, it is enough to win in that moment. Humans never submit to each other, even slaves will respond in a cowardly manner befitting their servitude. Thus, humans have no other means of survival than to rely on the outcomes of these immediate contests, while claiming some grand justification. The goal of their efforts inevitably transcends the individual, and the confusion of society is the confusion of the individual. The vast ocean is not society, but the individual. I began to be somewhat liberated from the fear of the illusion of this great sea of the world, and I learned to act a bit more boldly according to my immediate needs, without the boundless concern I had before. I abandoned my apartment in Koenji and told the madam at the stand bar in Kyobashi, "I've separated." That was enough. In other words, the decisive moment had come, and from that night on, I brazenly started staying on the second floor of that bar. However, the supposedly terrifying society didn't harm me in any way, and I didn't make any explanations to society either. If the madam was okay with it, that was all that mattered. I must have appeared to be a customer, a husband, a messenger, a relative, or some other strangely ambiguous existence to the outsiders, yet society showed no suspicion whatsoever. The regulars at the bar treated me very kindly, calling me Yo-chan and allowing me to drink as much as I wanted. I gradually became less cautious about the world. I started to think that the world wasn't such a scary place. In other words, my previous feelings of fear had been like the belief that spring breezes carried countless whooping cough germs, that public baths contained numerous blinding bacteria, that barber shops were infested with germs causing baldness, and that the straps on trains were teeming with scabies mites. Or, I was terrified by the notion that raw sashimi or undercooked beef and pork harbored larvae of tapeworms, dystoma, and other eggs. It was as if I had been haunted by these so-called scientific superstitions. It is true that the idea of millions of bacteria floating around is scientifically accurate. At the same time, I learned that if I completely ignored their existence, they would vanish in an instant, becoming mere scientific ghosts with no connection to me whatsoever. For example, if 3 grains of rice are left uneaten in a bento box, that would mean millions of people, if each left 3 grains uneaten daily, would have wasted a significant amount of rice. Or, if millions of people saved just 1 sheet of tissue paper a day, how much pulp would be wasted? I had been terrorized by such scientific statistics, feeling guilty every time I left even a grain of rice uneaten or blew my nose, suffering under the illusion that I was wasting mountains of rice or pulp, as if I were committing a grave sin. However, it turned out to be scientific lies, statistical lies, and mathematical lies. 3 grains of rice cannot be gathered, and the application of multiplication and division in such themes is primitive and simple-minded. Calculating how often a person stumbles and falls into that hole in a dark toilet without light, or how many passengers drop their feet into the gap between a train and the platform, is as ridiculous as it sounds. While these scenarios might seem plausible, I never heard of anyone getting hurt from stumbling over a toilet hole, yet I was taught such hypotheses as scientific facts and accepted them as reality, living in fear until yesterday. I began to think fondly of my previous self, who feared the world so much that it made me want to laugh at my ignorance. I gradually started to understand the reality of the world. That said, I still found humans frightening, and I needed to down a glass of alcohol before encountering the bar customers. I was curious about fear. Every night, I went out to the bar, and like a child who is a bit scared but holds on tightly to a small animal, I began to drunkenly spout my clumsy art theories to the customers. A cartoonist. Ah, yet I am just an anonymous cartoonist with no great joy or great sorrow. No matter how much great sorrow may come later, I inwardly yearn for a rough, great joy. But my current joy was merely exchanging trivialities with customers and drinking their alcohol. Having come to Kyobashi, I had already been living this worthless life for almost a year. My cartoons started to appear not only in magazines for children but also in cheap, vulgar magazines sold at train stations. I drew under the ridiculous pseudonym Makuta, for my tragic love life, creating crude naked illustrations and often inserting lines from the Rubaiyat. Stop those useless prayers. Cast away anything that brings tears. Come on, let's drink. Remember only the good things. Forget about unnecessary worries. Those who threaten others with anxiety and fear. Tremble at the grand sins they themselves have created. Preparing for the vengeance of the dead. Constantly plotting against themselves. Call out. With wine, my heart is filled with joy. This morning, I awakened to desolation. Wondering, within the one night, what has changed in this feeling of mine? Stop thinking about curses. Like the distant echo of a drum. Somehow, that is anxiety. If even the slightest farts are counted as sins, I won't survive. Is justice the guiding principle of life? Farewell to the blood-soaked battlefield. What kind of justice can reside in the tips of an assassin's blade? Where is the guiding principle? What light of wisdom is there? Beautiful yet terrifying is this fleeting world. The weak human child carries an unbearable load, because of the seeds of desire that can't be helped. Cursed by the notions of good and evil, sin and punishment. I can do nothing but fumble about. Without the power or will to suppress and crush. Where have I been wandering around? What criticism, examination, re-evaluation? Hey, empty dreams, non-existent phantoms. Since I forgot the wine, everything's just foolish contemplation. Look. The vast sky of this world. In it, a tiny floating dot. How can I understand why this earth rotates? Rotation, revolution, inversion, it's all up to you. I feel the supreme power everywhere. Discovering the same humanity in every nation, every ethnicity. Am I an heretic? Everyone misreads the sacred scriptures. Otherwise, there's no common sense or wisdom. To forbid the joy of being alive, to stop drinking. Fine, Mustafa, I hate that kind of thing. However, at that time, there was a virgin who advised me to quit drinking. It's no good, you're drunk every day from noon. She was a girl of 17 or 18 from the small tobacco shop across from the bar. Her name was Yoshi-chan, a girl with fair skin and distinctive double canines. Every time I went to buy cigarettes, she would smile and offer her advice. Why is it no good? What's wrong with it? Drink all the liquor you have, and you can rid yourself of hatred, you know, just like in ancient Persia. Well, never mind that. Hope for the weary heart can only come from a light intoxication, you know. Do you understand? I don't understand. You idiot. I'll kiss you. Go ahead. She pouted her lower lip without any sign of shame. You fool. What about your sense of chastity? However, Yoshi-chan's expression clearly bore the scent of a virgin who had not been tainted by anyone. On a cold night after the New Year, I went out to buy cigarettes while drunk and fell into a manhole in front of her shop, crying out, "Yoshi-chan, help me." She pulled me up and treated the wound on my right arm. At that moment, Yoshi-chan said with a serious tone, "You're drinking too much." I was okay with dying, but I absolutely couldn't bear the thought of being injured and becoming disabled, so while she treated my arm, I thought maybe it was time to quit drinking. "I'll stop. Starting tomorrow, I won't drink a single drop." "Really?" "I'll definitely stop. If I do, Yoshi-chan, will you marry me?" However, the marriage proposal was just a joke. Of course. Of course was an abbreviation for Modi. During that time, various abbreviations were in vogue, like Mobo and Moga. "All right. Let's make a pact. I will definitely stop." Yet, the next day, I ended up drinking again from noon. In the evening, feeling dizzy, I went outside and stood in front of Yoshi-chan's shop. "Yoshi-chan, I'm sorry. I drank." "Oh, no. Don't pretend to be drunk." I was taken aback, my mind felt clear. "No, it's true. I really drank. I'm not pretending to be drunk." "Don't tease me. You're being mean." She didn't seem to doubt me at all. "If you looked, you'd understand. I drank from noon again today. Please forgive me." "You're good at acting, aren't you?" "It's not an act, you fool. I'll kiss you." "Go ahead." "No, I don't have the right. I have to give up on marrying you. Look at my face, it's red, isn't it? I've been drinking." "That's because the evening sun is shining on you. You can't just say that. You promised yesterday. There's no way you'd drink. You made a pact, after all. Saying you drank is a lie, a lie, a lie." Yoshi-chan's white face smiling in the dimly lit shop seemed so pure. Ah, the untouched beauty of virginity is a precious thing. I had never slept with a girl younger than myself, and I thought to marry her. I didn't care if great sorrows came afterward, I just wanted to experience rough and immense joy once in my life. I had thought that the beauty of virginity was merely the sweet sentimentality of a foolish poet, but I realized that it truly exists in this world. When spring came after we got married, we would ride our bicycles together to see the Ōba Falls. I made the decision right then and there, without hesitation about one shot to steal that flower. So we eventually got married, and the joy we gained from it wasn't necessarily great. However, the sorrow that followed was so severe that it could only be described as horrific. It truly came in a way that was unimaginable. For me, the world was still unfathomably terrifying. It was never a simple place where everything could be resolved in a single shot. 2. Horiguchi and I. If the so-called friendship in this world consists of mutual contempt and the gradual devaluation of each other, then my relationship with Horiguchi truly qualifies as friendship. I had relied on the chivalry of the madam at the stand bar in Kyobashi. The use of chivalry in relation to women might seem odd, but based on my experience, at least among urban men and women, women often possess a greater sense of what could be called chivalry. Men tend to be cautious and stingy, preoccupied with appearances. I managed to make Yoshiko from the tobacco shop my common-law wife, rented a small wooden 2-story apartment near Tsukiji and the Sumida River, and we lived together. I had quit drinking and was beginning to immerse myself in my work as a manga artist, which was slowly becoming my stable profession. After dinner, We would go out to see movies and stop by coffee shops on our way back, sometimes buying potted flowers. More than anything, I enjoyed listening to the words and observing the actions of this little bride who genuinely trusted me. I began to secretly nurture the sweet thought that perhaps I could gradually become more human and avoid a tragic death. Just as I was warming to this idea, Horiguchi appeared before me again. "Hey, color demon. Oh, you've somewhat developed a more discerning look. Today, I come bearing a message from the Lady of Koenji," he started, but then suddenly lowered his voice, pointing his chin toward Yoshiko, who was preparing tea in the kitchen, and asked, "Is everything all right?" "It's fine. You can say whatever you want," I replied calmly. Indeed, I would say Yoshiko was a genius of trust. Even when I told her about the incident I had caused in Kamakura, she never doubted me or my relationship with Tsunakichi, not because I was particularly skilled at lying, but because sometimes I would even speak quite frankly. Yet, for Yoshiko, it all sounded like just a joke. "Still carrying that burden, I see. Well, it's not a big deal, but they want you to come visit Koenji once in a while." Just as I was starting to forget, the monstrous bird flapped its wings and returned, piercing the wounds of my memory with its beak. Suddenly, the memories of past shame and guilt unfolded vividly before me, filling me with a terror that made it impossible to sit still. "Shall we drink?" I suggested. "Sure," replied Horiguchi. Me and Hiraiki. We resembled each other in shape. There were times when I felt we were almost identical. Of course, that was only when we were out drinking cheap alcohol here and there, but anyway, whenever we faced each other, we would quickly turn into two dogs of the same breed and the same coat, racing around in the snowy streets. Since that day, we had rekindled our old friendship, and we went together to that small bar in Kyobashi. Eventually, those two drunken dogs even visited Shizuko's apartment in Koenji and stayed over before heading back home. I will never forget. It was a muggy summer night. Hiraiki arrived at my apartment in Tsukiji wearing a shabby yukata around dusk. He said he needed some money because he had pawned his summer clothes for some reason, and it would be really bad if his elderly mother found out. He wanted to retrieve them immediately and asked me to lend him some money. Unfortunately, I didn't have any either, so I asked Yoshiko for help. I had Yoshiko take her clothes to the pawnshop to raise some money, which I lent to Hiraiki. There was even a little left over, so I had Yoshiko buy some shachu with that, and we went up to the rooftop of the apartment, enjoying a truly shabby summer party, receiving the faint, musty breeze occasionally blowing from the Sumida River. At that time, we started a game of matching comedic nouns with tragic nouns. This was a game I invented, where nouns could be classified into masculine nouns, feminine nouns, and neuter nouns, but at the same time, there should also be a distinction between comedic and tragic nouns. For example, both steamship and train are tragic nouns, while streetcar and bus are comedic nouns. Anyone who cannot understand why is not fit to discuss art. A playwright who includes even one tragic noun in a comedy has already failed. The same applies to tragedies. "Hey, what about cigarettes?" I asked. "Tragedy, short for tragedy," Hiraiki replied immediately. "What about drugs? Powder or pills? Injection. Tragedy. Really? There are hormone injections, you know." "No, definitely tragedy. The needle is the most important thing. You're quite a tragedy yourself." "All right, I'll concede. But you know, drugs and doctors are surprisingly comedy." "Death. Comedy. The same goes for priests and monks." "Excellent. And life is a tragedy, right?" "Wrong. That's also comedy." "No, if that were the case, everything would become comedy. Now, let me ask you one more thing, what about a manga artist? You can't possibly say that's comedy. Tragedy, tragedy. A great tragedy. What? The big tragedy is you. Although this turned into a sort of poor pun, we were still quite proud of the cleverness of our little game, which we thought was quite unique in the world's salons. I had also invented another similar game at the time. It was about guessing antonyms. The antonym of black is white. But the antonym of white is red, and the antonym of red is black. What's the antonym of flower? I asked. Hiroki twisted his mouth in thought and replied. Well, there was a restaurant called Kagetsu, so it must be moon. No, that's not an antonym. It's more like a synonym. Stars and violets are synonyms too, not antonyms. Got it, it's bees. Bees? Peonies, ants? Oh, that's a motif. You can't cheat. Got it. Flowering clouds, It's clouds in the moon, right? Right, right. Flower and wind. Wind. The antonym of flower is wind. That's not good, that's a line from a Naniwabashi song. You're showing your roots. No, it's the biwa. Even worse. The antonym of flower should be something that is the least flowery in the world. Then, wait, I know, it's women. While we're at it, what's the synonym for women? Organs. You really don't understand poetry, do you? So, what's the antonym of organs? Milk. That's pretty clever. Keep it going. Shame. What's the antonym of shame? Shamelessness. The popular manga artist, Akuta. What about Hiroki Masao? At this point, we started to find it increasingly hard to laugh, and the specific intoxication from the shochu began to fill our heads like shards of glass, bringing a gloomy mood. Don't be so cheeky. I've never received the kind of disgrace you have. I was shocked. Hiroki didn't see me as a normal person, he merely regarded me as a shameless, half-dead, foolish creature, what could be called a living corpse. He could only utilize me for his pleasure, and nothing more. This friendship didn't feel good at all. However, it was understandable that Hiroki saw me this way, as I had always been like a child without any qualifications as a human. Maybe it was fitting that I was looked down upon even by Hiroki. I thought about it and said, sin. What's the antonym of sin? This is a tricky one. I pretended to casually say it. Law. Hiroki answered flatly, so I looked at his face again. Illuminated by the flickering neon signs from nearby buildings, Hiroki's face looked dignified like a demon detective. I was taken aback, thinking. Sin isn't something that simple, right? The antonym of sin is law. However, it might be that people in society think about it this simply and live their lives unaffected. Sin crawls where there are no detectives. So, what? God? You have a bit of a preacher vibe, don't you? That's kind of rich. Don't dismiss it so easily. Let's think about it a bit more together. This is an interesting theme. I feel like you can understand everything about a person from their answer to this theme. No way. The antonym of sin is goodness. A good citizen. In other words, someone like me. Let's not joke. However, good is the antonym of evil, not the antonym of sin. Isn't evil and sin different? I think so. The concept of good and evil is something humans created. It's a moral term made up by humans. You're so noisy. Then, it must be God, right? God, God. Anything can be put in the category of God, and there's no mistake about that. I'm hungry. Right now, Yoshi is cooking broad beans downstairs. How nice. That's my favorite. He clasped his hands behind his head and lay back. You seem to have no interest in sin at all. Well, that's because I'm not a sinner like you. I indulge in pleasures, but I don't kill women or extort money from them. It wasn't that I caused her to die, nor that I extorted money from her, but somewhere deep within my heart, a faint yet desperate voice of protest arose. Yet again, I immediately thought, no, it's my fault. This habit of mine. I simply could not engage in a straightforward debate. The oppressive haze of the shanshu was making my feelings increasingly tense, and I struggled to suppress it, speaking almost as if to myself. However, being locked up isn't the only sin. If I can understand the antonym of sin, I feel like I could grasp the essence of sin as well. God. Salvation. Love. Light. But for every God, there is an antonym, Satan. For salvation, there is suffering. For love, there is hatred. For light, there is darkness. Good has evil. Sin and prayer. Sin and regret. Sin and confession. Sin and... they are all synonyms. What is the antonym of sin? The antonym of sumi, sin, is mitsu, honey. As sweet as honey. I'm hungry. Bring me something to eat. Why don't you bring something? A voice of fierce anger emerged from me, almost as if for the first time. All right then, I'll go downstairs and commit sin with Yoshiko. Better to investigate than to argue. The antonym of sin is sweet beans. No, it must be broad beans. I was almost too drunk to articulate properly. Do as you please. Just go somewhere. Sin and hunger, hunger and broad beans. Wait, is that a synonym? Mumbling nonsense, I got up. Sin and punishment. Dostoevsky. That thought flickered across the corner of my mind, and I suddenly realized. What if Dostoevsky didn't think of sin and punishment as synonyms but arranged them as antonyms? Sin and punishment, absolutely incompatible, like ice and fire. If Dostoevsky viewed sin and punishment as antonyms, murky, rotten pools, tangled in chaos. I was beginning to understand. No, not yet. While such thoughts whirled in my mind. Hey! It's a big deal. Come. Horiguchi's voice and expression had changed. He had just staggered downstairs but then turned back again. What is it? He looked unusually tense. We descended from the rooftop to the second floor, and halfway down the stairs to my room, Horiguchi stopped. Look, he said quietly, pointing. The small window above my room was open, and I could see inside. The light was on, and there were two animals inside. Dizzy, I murmured to myself, this too is a human form, this too is a human form, there's no need to be surprised, my breath becoming labored as I stood frozen on the stairs, forgetting to help Yoshiko. Horiaki cleared his throat loudly. I fled back up to the rooftop, lay down, and gazed at the summer night sky filled with rain. The emotion that struck me at that moment was not anger, nor disgust, nor sadness, it was a terrifying, overwhelming fear. It was not the fear of ghosts in a graveyard but rather an ancient, primal fear one might feel when encountering a white-robed deity in a cedar grove. It was that night my premature gray hair began, and I lost all confidence in everything, increasingly doubting others, forever separating myself from any hope, joy, or resonance in the affairs of this world. Indeed, it was a decisive event in my life. I felt as if my forehead had been split open, and since then, that wound throbbed every time I got close to anyone. I sympathize, but you've learned a lesson from this, haven't you? I'll never come back here again. It's like hell. But let Yoshiko be. You're not a decent person yourself. Excuse me. Horiaki was not the type to linger in an awkward place for long. I stood up, drank shochu alone, and then cried out loud. I could cry as much as I wanted. Before I knew it, Yoshiko was standing behind me, holding a plate piled high with broad beans, looking dazed. I said I wouldn't do anything. It's fine. Don't say anything. You didn't know how to doubt people. Sit down. Let's eat beans. We sat down together and ate the beans. Ah, is trust a sin? The man I was referring to was a small, uneducated merchant, around 30 years old, who had me draw manga and left behind a meager amount of money. As expected, that merchant never came back. However, for some reason, I felt more hatred and anger toward Horiaki, who had returned to inform me without even coughing when he first discovered everything, rather than toward that merchant. That resentment surged up in me during sleepless nights, groaning. There was no forgiveness or refusal. Yoshiko was a genius of trust. She had never known how to doubt anyone. Yet, therein lay her tragedy. I asked God, is trust a sin? The fact that Yoshiko had been defiled was not as painful to me as the realization that her trust had been sullied. For someone like me, someone who was cowardly and constantly looking at others' expressions, with a cracked ability to trust, Yoshiko's pure trust seemed as refreshing as a waterfall. It changed into yellow, murky water overnight. Look, from that night onward, Yoshiko began to be cautious even about her every frown and smile. Hey, I called, and she flinched, clearly at a loss for where to look. No matter how hard I tried to make her laugh or joked around, she was flustered and anxious, and started using polite language with me. Could it be that pure trust is the source of sin? I searched for and read various stories about married women who had been violated. However, I thought there was no woman who had suffered as tragically as Yoshiko. After all, this didn't even qualify as a story. If there had been even a semblance of romantic feelings between that little merchant and Yoshiko, my feelings might have been alleviated, but it was just a summer night when Yoshiko had trusted him, and that was it. For that, my brow was split open, my voice became hoarse, and my premature gray hairs began to show, while Yoshiko would have to live her life in constant anxiety. Most stories seem to focus on whether the husband would forgive the wife's act, but that didn't seem like a particularly agonizing issue for me. The husband, who reserved the right to forgive or not, was truly fortunate. If he couldn't forgive, instead of making such a big fuss about it, why not just quickly divorce his wife and marry someone new? If that wasn't possible, then he could simply forgive and endure it. Either way, it seemed to me that the husband's feelings alone would dictate how things would ultimately turn out. In other words, such events might indeed be a tremendous shock for the husband. However, it was just that, a shock, and unlike the endlessly crashing waves that keep coming back, it seemed to me to be a problem that could be resolved through the rightful anger of a husband. But in our case, the husband had no rights whatsoever, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt that it was all my fault. Instead of feeling angry, I couldn't even voice a complaint, and the wife had been violated due to her rare and precious quality. Moreover, that quality was the irresistibly lovely purity of trust that her husband had longed for. Is pure trust a sin? Even toward that soul-cherished quality, I harbored suspicions, and I became utterly confused about everything. My only recourse became alcohol. My facial expressions grew increasingly sordid. I started drinking shochu from morning, my teeth chipped away, and I began to draw cartoons that were nearly pornographic. No, let me be clear, from that time on, I was copying shunga, erotic art, and selling it secretly. I needed money to buy shochu. Whenever I saw Yoshiko, who always averted her gaze and seemed anxious, I couldn't help but think that she was completely oblivious to any sense of danger, which made me wonder if her encounter with that merchant wasn't just a one-time thing. What about her Reiki? No, maybe it was someone I didn't even know. Suspicion bred suspicion, and yet I lacked the courage to confront it directly. I writhed in anxiety and fear, drinking shochu to get drunk, and made feeble attempts at a pathetic sort of leading interrogation, feeling foolish and wavering between joy and sorrow, while on the surface, I played the fool and added the foulest hellish caresses to Yoshiko, then fell into a deep, mud-like sleep. That year's end, I returned home late at night in a drunken stupor. Wanting to drink some sugar water and seeing that Yoshiko seemed to be asleep, I went to the kitchen myself to look for the sugar jar. When I opened it, I found it empty, with a long, thin black box inside. I picked it up absent-mindedly and was horrified to see the label on the box, which had been scratched off with a nail more than half of the way, but the part with the letters remained. It was clearly written, Dial. Dial. At that time, I was primarily drinking shochu and wasn't using any sleeping pills. However, insomnia was like a chronic illness for me, so I was familiar with most sleeping medications. This box of Dial must have contained a lethal dose. I hadn't opened the box yet, but surely, at some point, I had the motivation to hide it here, and I must have been the one to scratch off the label. Poor thing, she couldn't read the English on the label, so she probably thought it would be alright after scratching off half of it with her nails. You are not to blame. I quietly filled a glass with water, careful not to make any noise. Then I slowly opened the box and poured all the contents into my mouth at once, calmly drank the water from the glass, turned off the light, and went to sleep just like that. For 3 days and nights, I was said to have been like a dead person. The doctor considered it an accident and delayed reporting it to the police. As I was coming to consciousness, the first mumble that escaped my lips was the word home. I'm not sure which place I was referring to, but in any case, I said it and cried a lot. Gradually, the fog began to clear, and I noticed a flounder sitting by my bedside, looking extremely displeased. Just the other day, around New Year's, when we were both so busy we could barely keep our heads straight, I can't stand being subjected to this kind of thing at such a time, said the flounder. The one listening to the flounder was the madam from the bar in Kyobashi. Madam, I called out. Yes? Are you awake? The madam said, covering her face with a smile as she spoke. Tears streamed down my face as I unexpectedly uttered words I didn't even expect to say. Please let me part ways with Yoshiko. The madam sat up and sighed softly. Then I also said something that was indeed very unexpected, something so ridiculous and absurd that I struggled to find the right words to describe it. I'm going to a place without women. The flounder burst into loud laughter, followed by the madam chuckling, and I, blushing while shedding tears, forced a bitter smile. Yes, that's better, said the flounder, still laughing lazily. It's better to go to a place without women. Things just don't work out when there are women around. Going to a place without women is a good idea. A place without women. However, this foolish mumble of mine later materialized in a very grim way. Yoshiko seemed to be under the impression that I had taken her place and drank the poison instead. As a result, she was even more anxious around me than before, unable to laugh at anything I said, and barely able to speak. Being in the apartment became suffocating, and I ended up going outside to drink cheap alcohol as usual. However, since the incident with the dial, my body had grown markedly thinner, my arms and legs felt heavy, and I had become negligent in my work as a manga artist. The money that Hiram had left as a visit, he pretended it was his own money, saying it was Shibuya's will, but it seemed like money from his brothers back home, made me, unlike the time I had escaped from Hiram's house, able to vaguely see through his pretentious act. I played along, pretending not to notice, and sincerely thanked Hiram for the money. However, I couldn't help but feel something strange about why they would create such a complicated ruse. With that money, I decided to go to a hot spring in Nanami-Izu by myself. However, it was not a relaxing trip at all. Thinking of Yoshiko filled me with a sense of desolation. I was far from the tranquil state of mind needed to look at the mountains from the inn room. Without even changing into a yukata or soaking in the hot water, I rushed outside and dove into a shabby tea house, drinking shochu to the point of excess, which only worsened my physical condition when I returned to Tokyo. It was a night of heavy snowfall in Tokyo. I was drunk, wandering behind Ginza, repeating quietly, "This is my home, hundreds of miles away, this is my home," while kicking the accumulating snow with my shoes when suddenly, I vomited. It was my first time coughing up blood. A large red circle appeared on the snow. I crouched down for a while, scooped up the untouched snow with both hands, and washed my face while crying. What kind of narrow path is this? I could faintly hear the sorrowful song of a young girl as if it were an auditory hallucination from far away. Misery. In this world, there are all kinds of unfortunate people. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration to say that only unfortunate people exist. However, their misfortune allows them to boldly protest against society, and society easily understands and sympathizes with their protests. But my misfortune stems entirely from my own sins, leaving me with no way to voice any complaint. Whenever I would stutter out something resembling a protest, everyone, not just Hiram, would surely be astonished that I even had the audacity to speak. I couldn't determine if I was what is commonly referred to as selfish, or if, conversely, I was simply too weak-hearted. In any case, it seemed I was merely a mass of guilt, destined to sink deeper into misfortune with no tangible way to stop it. I stood up and thought I should get some appropriate medicine. I entered a nearby pharmacy and met the gaze of the shopkeeper's wife. In an instant, her eyes widened as if she had been struck by a flash, and she stood frozen. Yet, there was no look of shock or disgust in her wide eyes, only an almost pleading, affectionate expression. Ah, this person too must be unhappy. Unhappy people are sensitive to the misfortunes of others. As I thought this, I suddenly noticed that the shopkeeper's wife was precariously balancing on crutches. I suppressed the urge to rush to her side, and as we continued to meet each other's gaze, tears began to flow from my eyes. Then, tears spilled from her large eyes as well. After that, without saying a word, I stumbled out of the pharmacy, made my way back to the apartment, had Yoshiko prepare a saline solution for me to drink, went to bed in silence, and the next day, I lied about having a cold and spent the whole day sleeping. That night, my anxiety over my secret hemoptysis became unbearable. I got up and went back to that pharmacy. This time, laughing, I sincerely confessed my health issues to the lady and consulted her. "If you stop drinking," she said, "we were like flesh and blood. I might be an alcoholic. I still want to drink," I admitted. "That won't do. My husband, despite being a doctor, said that alcohol kills germs and became a drunkard, shortening his own life. I can't help but feel anxious. I'm so scared, it's really bad. I'll give you some medicine. But you must stop drinking." The lady, who was a widow with one son, who had just entered medical school in Chiba or somewhere and was currently hospitalized for the same illness as his father, had a father-in-law with a stroke lying at home, and she herself had suffered from polio at the age of 5, leaving one leg completely unusable, was gathering various medications for me, tapping her crutches along the way. This is a hematinic. This is a vitamin injection. Here's the syringe. This is a calcium tablet. And this is diastase to prevent upsetting your stomach. What's this? What's this? She explained with affection as she showed me 5 or 6 different medicines. However, the love of this unfortunate lady was too deep for me as well. In the end, she quickly wrapped a small box in paper and said, "This is the medicine for when you desperately want to drink." It was morphine injection. The lady said it wouldn't harm me like alcohol, and I believed her. Besides, I had recently begun to feel that the drunkenness from alcohol was indeed filthy. There was also the joy of being able to escape from the Satan of alcohol after a long time. With no hesitation, I injected the morphine into my arm. My anxiety, impatience, and shyness were all beautifully removed, and I became a remarkably cheerful and eloquent person. After the injection, I forgot my physical weakness and threw myself into my cartoon work, producing such bizarre ideas that I ended up laughing out loud while drawing. What started as 1 injection a day turned into 2, then 4, until I found myself unable to work without it. No, you can't. If you become addicted, it's going to be a serious problem, said the lady at the pharmacy. Hearing that made me feel like I was already quite a severe addict. I'm the type of person who easily falls for suggestions from others. Even if someone says, "You shouldn't spend that money," and follows it up with, "But it's you we're talking about," I somehow get this weird illusion that I'll be doing something wrong if I don't spend it, as if I'm letting someone down, and I end up spending that money right away. Because of this anxiety about addiction, I began to seek out even more medication. Please. Just 1 more box. I'll definitely pay the bill at the end of the month. The bill doesn't matter whenever you pay, but the police are rather strict about this, she replied. There always seems to be a murky, dark, suspicious presence lurking around me. Please, find a way to work around it. I'll even give you a kiss. The lady blushed. I pressed on further. Without the medicine, my work doesn't progress at all. To me, it's like a stamina booster. In that case, wouldn't a hormone injection be better? She suggested. Don't be ridiculous. I can't work without either alcohol or that medicine. It has to be one or the other. Alcohol is out of the question. Isn't that right? Since I started using that medicine, I haven't had a drop of alcohol. Thanks to that, I feel really good. I'm not planning to keep drawing these poorly done cartoons forever. From now on, I'll quit drinking, fix my health, study hard, and I'll definitely show you I can become a great artist. This is a crucial moment for me. So, please, how about a kiss? She started to laugh. That's troublesome. If you become addicted, don't say I didn't warn you. Tapping her crutches, she took the medication from the shelf. I can't give you a whole box. You'd use it all right away. Just half. You're stingy. Well, there's nothing I can do about it. Once I got home, I immediately injected myself with 1 dose. Doesn't it hurt? Yoshiko asked timidly. Oh, it hurts. But to improve my work efficiency, I have to do this whether I like it or not. Aren't I looking very energetic lately? Now, let's get to work. Work, work, I exclaimed cheerfully. There was even a night when I knocked on the pharmacy door. When the lady came out in her pajamas, using her crutches, I suddenly hugged her and kissed her, pretending to cry. The lady silently handed me a box. When I came to realize that the medicine was as vile and filthy as shachu, or even worse, I was already a complete addict. It was truly the peak of shamelessness. I started copying spring pictures just to obtain that medicine, and I even developed a literally ugly relationship with the disabled lady from the pharmacy. I wanted to die, I wished I could just die. There was no turning back, no matter what I did, it would only lead to failure. It was just adding to my shame. I could not even think of cycling to Ōba Falls anymore. Only despicable sins piled upon each other, intensifying my suffering. I wanted to die, I had to die. Living itself was the seed of sin. Even though I tortured myself with these thoughts, I was still just going back and forth in a half-crazed state between the apartment and the pharmacy. No matter how much I worked, the amount of medicine I used only increased, and the debt for the medicine soared to an astonishing sum. When the lady saw my face, her eyes filled with tears, and I cried as well. Hell! This was the last resort to escape from this hell. If this failed, I would only have to hang myself. With the resolve to gamble on the existence of God, I decided to write a long letter to my father back in my hometown, confessing my entire situation, though I couldn't write about the woman, of course. However, the outcome was even worse. No matter how long I waited, I received no reply. Out of that frustration and anxiety, I ended up increasing the dosage of the medicine instead. That night, I prepared to inject 10 doses all at once, and that afternoon, when I had secretly resolved to jump into the great river, Hiram showed up with Hiraiki, as if he had sensed my intentions through some devilish intuition. "I heard you've been coughing up blood," Hiram said, sitting cross-legged in front of me, smiling more gently than I had ever seen before. That gentle smile was so precious and joyful that I turned away and cried. With just his kind smile, I was completely shattered and buried. I was taken by car. "You have to be hospitalized. Leave the rest to us," Hiram said in a solemn tone, one I would describe as almost mercifully quiet, and urged me on. I followed their instructions, crying helplessly, as if I had no will or judgment. Including Yoshiko, the 4 of us were jostled in the car for quite a while, and when it grew dim outside, we arrived at the entrance of a large hospital deep in the woods. I thought it was just a sanatorium. I received an unusually gentle and respectful examination from a young doctor, and then he said with a shy smile, "Well, you'll be resting here for a while. Hiram, Hiraiki, and Yoshiko would be leaving without me." Yoshiko handed me a furoshiki bundle containing a change of clothes and then silently offered me the syringe and the leftover medication from between her obi. Perhaps she still thought of it as a stamina booster. "No, I don't need it anymore." This was truly a rare occurrence. To be offered something and then to refuse it was, at that moment, something I had done only once in my entire life. It would not be an exaggeration to say that. My misfortune was that of someone who lacked the ability to refuse. When I was offered something and rejected it, I was haunted by the terrifying thought of an irreparable rift forming in both the other person's heart and my own. However, at that moment, I naturally refused the morphine I had been desperately seeking. Was I struck by what you might call Yoshiko's divine ignorance? Perhaps. At that instant, I was no longer an addict. But immediately after that, I was guided by the shy smiling young doctor into a certain ward, where I was locked in with a clang of the key. It was a mental hospital. The foolish ramblings I had uttered when I took that Juru about going to a place without women had now strangely come true. The ward was filled only with male lunatics, and the attendants were all men. There were no women at all. Now I was no longer merely a sinner, I had become a madman. No, I absolutely was not insane. Not for a single moment had I ever gone mad. But, it seems that madmen often say that about themselves. In other words, those who are admitted to this hospital are deemed insane, while those who are not are considered normal. I ask God, is being defenseless a sin? I cried at Hariki's mysterious and beautiful smile, forgetting my judgment and resistance as I got into the car. And so I was brought here, labeled a madman. Even if I were to get out of here, I would still be a madman. No, the stigma of being a freak would surely be branded on my forehead. Humanity, disqualified. I have completely ceased to be human. I came here in early summer, and through the iron-barred window, I could see red water lilies blooming in the small pond of the hospital garden. 3 months have passed since then, and cosmos flowers have started to bloom in the garden. Unexpectedly, my eldest brother from my hometown came to pick me up with Hiram, informing me that our father had passed away from a stomach ulcer at the end of last month. He assured me that we would no longer ask about my past, nor would we worry about my living situation. I didn't have to do anything. Instead, he said, I should quickly leave Tokyo and start a healing life in the countryside, mentioning that my affairs in Tokyo had mostly been taken care of by Shibuya, so I didn't need to worry about that, all in a serious, tense tone. I felt as if I could see the mountains and rivers of my hometown before me, and I faintly nodded. Truly a cripple. Since learning of my father's death, I have become even more vacuous. The presence that I cherished and feared, which had never left my heart for a moment, is gone. I felt as if the vessel of my suffering had emptied. I even began to think that the weight of my suffering had been due to my father. It was as if all my motivation had drained away. I had even lost the ability to suffer. My eldest brother faithfully executed his promise to me. There is a warm seaside hot spring about 4 or 5 hours south by train from my hometown, which is quite rare in Tohoku. He bought an old thatched roof house on the outskirts of that village, with walls peeling and columns eaten by insects, nearly beyond repair, and gave it to me, along with a terribly ugly maid with a shocking red hair nearing 60. 3 years and a little have passed since then. During this time, I was assaulted in strange ways by the old maid Tetsu several times. Occasionally, we would begin to bicker like a couple. My chest condition fluctuated, with periods of weight loss and gain, and I coughed up blood. Just yesterday, I sent Tetsu to the village pharmacy to buy Kamodin, and when she returned with a box that looked different from the usual one, I didn't think much of it. When I took 10 pills before bed and couldn't fall asleep, I began to wonder what was wrong. Then, when I rushed to the bathroom due to an upset stomach, I was hit with severe diarrhea and had to go 3 more times after that. Unable to contain my suspicion, I examined the medicine box closely and found that it contained Henamodin, a laxative. I lay on my back, placing a hot water bottle on my stomach, thinking I would say to Tetsu, "This isn't Kamodin, it's Henamodin." But I ended up laughing. Cripple, this seems to be a comical term. Trying to sleep after taking a laxative, and the laxative's name is Henamodin. At this moment, I have neither happiness nor unhappiness. Only time passes. In the world of so-called humans where I have lived amidst cries of agony, the only truth that seems to exist is that only time passes. I will be 27 this year. Since my hair has turned considerably gray, most people see me as over 40.